This is Mission Control Houston. You're looking at a live view of the International Space Station Flight Control Room here in Houston, Texas. The teams here are about 5 minutes away from a go, no-go poll to proceed forward with the undocking of the Crew Dragon, currently at the forward end of the International Space Station. At this time, we're just standing by for the results of that go, no-go poll. Afterwards, we'll start working towards the procedures now that the vestibule in between Dragon and the International Space Station has been depressurized. Just a go to commence the sequence. And we'll resume our coverage of the undocking of SpaceX Crew Dragon during its Demonstration 1 mission here shortly. This is Mission Control Houston, about 2 minutes away from the go, no-go poll to be conducted from this room, the International Space Station Flight Control Room, here in the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. Leading the flight teams today are Scott Stover, Flight Director, who will be initiating the go, no-go command. Leslie Ringo is the Capcom today. You may hear her voice on the space-to-ground communication sending up to the crew, letting the crew know who are standing by to monitor the undocking and departure of Dragon from the International Space Station after the go, no-go results have been completed.
All right, so you're continuing to get some views in the two control rooms that are working together right now. And there we go.
So we just heard in our ears that we did get the call for go to undock.
Yeah, we just, you're hearing some of that space-to-ground conversation right now. All right, so that was it just there. The go, that Dragon is ready to undock. So now we're going to wait for the undocking sequence to actually begin, and once that happens, it's going to take less than 5 minutes for Dragon to separate from the International Space Station.
The first step in the automatic undocking sequence is for the umbilicals to retract. These umbilicals are basically the electrical connections that Dragon uses to connect and communicate with the space station. These umbilicals transfer power, telemetry, and commands between the two vehicles throughout Dragon's visit. Once that's complete, Dragon will unlatch itself from the space station by releasing the hard capture hooks in 2 separate phases. All of that combined will take roughly 4.5 minutes, and then Dragon will be ready to separate away from station and begin to push itself further and further away by using those Draco thrusters.
And now we're getting some really great views of Dragon attached to the International Space Station. As you can see, the sun is up, so we should have some nice daylight conditions for this undocking. That initial departure from the station is a little different from other docked vehicles that we're used to, like the Soyuz, that rely on springs to do that initial pushing away from the docking port. Dragon's actually going to execute 2 short thruster firings to undock, with that first breaking any stiction, and that's the technical term we like to use, between Dragon and the docking port, and the second one firing to slowly back the vehicle away. Both of those will take about 1.5 seconds. So we're going to continue to listen in and now enjoy these great views of Dragon as we wait for that undocking sequence to begin. Yeah, we are in daylight conditions, so the space station and Dragon right now are at an altitude of about 411 kilometers, so a little over 250 statute miles, flying over the northern Atlantic Ocean. They're actually about to begin a swing right over Spain and then over northern Africa, so we should start seeing some pretty land masses in the views below. But station's sitting there, so it's still docked to the international docking adapter. It's on the very front part of station. We think of it as the front because if you look at station and the direction that it's flying, this is the one kind of facing into the wind, if there were any wind, but there's no atmosphere. So Dragon's attached there. You can see the nose cone to the top portion. That'll get closed before the actual re-entry interface and all of the splashdown and everything, and that just helps protect that docking system on board. So the Crew Dragon's a little more reusable, but that nose cone gets jettisoned on the cargo Dragons. They can actually be jettisoned from this vehicle if required, but we're going to be looking for it to get closed before that actual splashdown. And I think we're expecting the undocking sequence to start on the timeline in about 7 minutes from now. And just to give you an idea, so this is a view from one of the cameras on the bottom part of the space station, the high definition Earth viewing experiment. So we're getting plenty of daylight now. There's a close-up view. You can see Crew Dragon on the left there, obviously. The white or kind of off-gray part that it's currently attached to is the international docking adapter. There's one of those currently on the station, and that was designed specifically to allow these new class of vehicles to begin docking to the International Space Station. It's attached to a pressurized mating adapter, which is used to connect modules together. It actually connects the US segment to the Russian segment on the station. And now this one has a docking adapter on the end of it that allows for these new commercial crew vehicles to attach. There's going to be another one moved eventually to the top part of the Harmony module, and a new international docking adapter, which will be flown up by a cargo Dragon, will get attached in a little while.
It's so great to see these views of Dragon on station. We have seen artistic renderings for years now, and to finally actually have live shots from the International Space Station is just incredible, a great realization of a lot of hard work. There on your screen, you can see, you might notice that there's a cylindrical portion attached to the Dragon capsule. That is the unpressurized section, which we call the trunk. The portion that is black are actually the solar panels. As Dragon is making its way towards station, it obviously needs to maintain power supply, and so we have these amazing solar panels there on that side. And then the other side, facing Earth is white. We don't have any solar panels there, so it's just white.
And the teams on the ground actually did a survey of Dragon, got some close-up looks at those solar cells. They used the space station's robotic arm throughout the week just to do these surveys. This was something common on the shuttle. It would use its own robotic arm to do surveys, usually following its liftoff and ascent into orbit. But while Dragon was attached, that was one of the things that the teams did. They also, of course, did checkouts of Dragon's communication systems. As Kate talked about a little bit earlier, it has those umbilicals, so passing data and power between the International Space Station. They were able to check that that worked out well, and obviously after we got the hatch open, they were able to integrate the cabin atmosphere inside of Dragon with that of the rest of the space station, putting in some intramodule ventilation ducts, IMVs. We got a lot of acronyms we have to get through. But it's been a very successful mission so far with Dragon attached, and now we're just looking forward to this on-time undocking, hopefully, I think. As we said a little bit earlier, we're expecting about 11:31 a.m. or p.m. What time is it? 11:30 p.m. Pacific time here on the West Coast for that initial separation, and it's going to be 2 quick firings of thrusters on board the Dragon spacecraft, each about a second and a half, just to begin moving the spacecraft away.
Similarly to how Dragon approaches the space station, slow and steady wins the race, and so whenever we fire those Draco thrusters in the series of burns that we'll talk about later, again, it's just controlled, carefully choreographed maneuvers that allow the spacecraft to safely move away. We will actually be we might not be able to see it, but the Dragon spacecraft will actually be going above the space station in its departure trajectory, and then going below it, and then at that point it'll be jettisoning the trunk. So we don't need the trunk anymore. It's the unpressurized section. We will release it prior to the Dragon capsule re-entering the atmosphere.
That's right, and just to kind of rehash some of the times that we'll expect to see following, so we'll expect that undocking command to come in about 2 minutes or so, and then once that's given, it takes about 5 minutes until that physical separation or undock actually occurs, and then just a few seconds after that, another burn will start, and then about 30 seconds following that second undocking burn, the first departure burn. So you might hear them called departure burn 0, 1, 2, or 3 between the conversations of the folks in mission control and the astronauts on board. So there's 4 of them, but don't get confused when we say departure burn 1 is started and this is the second burn. There are 4, but we start counting from 0 for this mission. And we're expecting Dragon to be out of the approach ellipsoid, which is just an imaginary shape around the station. It's kind of like a 3D oval. It's about 4 kilometers in length, 2 kilometers high, and 2 kilometers thick. And that's just that space where it helps govern the interaction of any approaching vehicle or departing vehicle with the International Space Station. On the approach, before you're in that approach ellipsoid, any maneuver your spacecraft does, you have to be sure that within 24 hours of continued flight, you're not going to get inside of that approach ellipsoid. It's basically, it's a nice zone where we can help keep the traffic flowing to and from station and make sure we're only approaching the spacecraft when we're ready and everything's checked out and we're good to go.
So you may have saw in one of the previous shots, Earth underneath the, there we go, underneath the Dragon capsule. Just for awareness, the International Space Station has a range in which it operates above Earth. We're around 250 miles above the surface, so you can see some great shots there, but realistically, it's pretty close to home.
All right, so now we're just going to stand by and wait to hear the undocking command.
Okay, so we just had the confirmation that umbilical retraction has begun. Undocking sequence is happening. Let's check in with Gary over at NASA's Space Station Mission Control at the Johnson Space Center.
Thanks, Kate. As you mentioned, the undocking sequence is underway. There's a series of milestones that are going to happen before actual physical separation. Again, physical separation occurs with a burn. That burn is followed a few seconds later by a second undocking burn, and then the first departure burn will commence its trip away from the space station. We do have umbilical retraction. There's a series of hooks that are to be unhooked first, Group 1 and Group 2. We'll stand by for confirmation of those latches to be unhooked. Group 1 is currently in the process of unhooking. Again, a series of commands until we actually have physical separation that occurs with a burn. After that, you'll start seeing Dragon, which from this view you can see on the left, physically move away from the International Space Station, currently docked to the International Docking Adapter. The first set of hooks are open. The next step is for the second set to unhook, which is now in progress. This process takes about 2 minutes. Once the Group 2 latches are unhooked, there'll be a physical separation burn that'll officially undock Dragon from the International Space Station, currently scheduled at 1:31 a.m. Central Time. At this time, the Group 1 latches are unhooked. Group 2 currently driving about 1 minute into the 2 minutes of the unhooking process. Everything on track for an on-time undocking, currently scheduled for 1:31 a.m. Central. One minute 45 seconds into the 2 minute process. Everything's still on track. And we have motion. You see Dragon physically separating from the International Space Station, 1:32 a.m. Central Time, the International Space Station 253 statute miles over Sedan.
Houston Station, space ground field ISS thrusters enabled. Copy.
So there you can see on your screen visual confirmation. What a gorgeous shot. Dragon has undocked from the International Space Station, and we are beginning the departure.
That's right, and you're going to hear the voice of David St. Jacques again. He's the one inside of the station monitoring Dragon for its departure. It's slowly backing away. Everything's looked good so far with those separation burns. Again, as Gary said, that physical separation, that undocking coming at 11:32 p.m. here Pacific.
Dragon departure burn 0 complete.
Copy, departure burn 0 complete.
So you heard us mention earlier that we have a series of 4 departure burns, starting with 0, 0, 1, 2, 3. We have confirmation that departure burn 0 has been completed.
That's right, and so with that one down, we're going to start seeing Dragon begin flying actually above the International Space Station. And then coming up in just a couple of minutes, departure burn 1, the second departure burn, will be coming. That should be in about 4 or 5 minutes from now. And so we're going to see Dragon just kind of swing its way over top the space station and eventually fly out of both the keep out sphere and the approach ellipsoid. And so the keep out sphere is one of my favorite things. It's an imaginary sphere with about a 200-mile radius, so 200-meter radius. That would be a much bigger sphere. A 200-meter radius in all directions. And that just governs, so kind of like the approach ellipsoid, which I explained earlier, before you're in the keep out sphere, any maneuvers with the spacecraft have to be safe and not get inside within 4 orbits.
Dragon is in the corridor, and opening rate is as expected.
Copy.
And David St. Jacques reporting everything looking good so far. You heard him say the corridor, so they, on their overlays that they have on their laptops on board the station where they're actually monitoring Dragon, they're looking for any perturbations outside of the expected path. If they see anything that doesn't quite look right, again, they're in the loop and they can send commands, but everything going smoothly with Dragon slowly flying away. This is kind of an animated representation of the kind of stuff that the crew is looking for. They have that corridor, so kind of that triangular shape you can see there, where they're just looking to make sure Dragon's pitch, yaw, approach, speeds, everything like that are inside of parameters as expected.
In that shot right there, you can see that the nose cone of Dragon is still open. Unlike our CRS missions, we actually maintain that nose cone. We will be closing it prior to Dragon's re-entry.
Copy, 0.55.
Like we mentioned before, the entire departure process is slightly different from the approach process in that there are no hard stops, there are no hold points. Dragon's trajectory will be smooth and continuous as it moves away from the International Space Station and back towards Earth.
And we should be just about 2 minutes or so away from departure burn 1, and that'll be the second of 4 that we're going to be expecting today. And it's actually only going to change Dragon's speed by about 0.6 meters per second. So we're talking very small changes in the speed of the vehicle just to get it away from the space station. But as we talked about a lot during the docking broadcast a little bit earlier this week, keep in mind, Dragon and Space Station are flying at over 17,500 miles an hour right now relative to the Earth. So they're still traveling at these enormous velocities, but then you have these very small thruster firings to barely change the speed of the vehicle. And within just a matter of minutes, you're kilometers or miles away from each other. So
that's a great point. It's really easy to forget that with views like this where everything seems like it's just standing still, but in fact, everything is moving incredibly fast.
All right, we're about 1 minute away from that next departure burn. This will be the burn that really begins swinging Dragon up and around the space station, and this will be the burn that actually carries it out of that keep out sphere and that exit through the approach ellipsoid. Now we're going to stick around with this as long as we have views of Dragon, and at a minimum until we're out of that approach ellipsoid, because that'll basically just mean that Dragon is outside of the neighborhood of the International Space Station and ready to begin its final departure burns, ultimately setting it up for its way home. So departure burn 0 came after those initial undocking burns that started carrying Dragon away. Departure burn 1 is going to be coming up shortly.
Station Houston and 2, departure burn 1 completed successfully.
So we have confirmation that departure burn 1, which is actually our second burn of the morning, is complete.
Copy, and Dragon is outside of the keep out sphere.
All right, and as you just heard the Capcom tell the crew, Dragon's outside of the keep out sphere.
Farewell, Dragon.
So that means at this point, Dragon's already more than 200 meters away. The next big milestone for it is when it actually gets outside of that approach ellipsoid, which again is an oval about 2 kilometers in height, so Dragon will be a little over 2 kilometers probably away from the space station by the time it exits that. And we're going to continue to follow along and watch. Once it's actually outside of that approach ellipsoid, it'll do another departure burn number 2. That's the third of 4. And that begins sending it back down underneath the International Space Station because, as Kate talked about a little bit earlier, once Dragon jettisons its trunk prior to the deorbit, we do want to make sure that it's below the space station's altitude. So that'll be coming up in a little while. But Dragon continuing to fly free. Look, everything looking good so far.
Like Dan said, the next big milestone that we're looking for here is exiting that approach ellipsoid. We're expecting that to happen at 11:48 p.m. Pacific, which is in about 8 minutes from now.
And you can actually see some of the Draco thruster firings from this view. Dragon a little over 400 meters now away from the space station.
So just in case you've just tuned in, we are currently watching Dragon as it departs from the International Space Station. It's been a really smooth operation so far with the undocking procedure, and now we're moving into departure. We will be losing video feed for a couple of minutes shortly, but as of right now, you can see on your screen the Dragon capsule moving away and towards the, as it moves out away from the approach ellipsoid. There we can see the nose cone still in its open position, leaving the forward hatch exposed. We will be closing that prior to Dragon's re-entry. We should have the exit from the approach ellipsoid here in just 5 minutes or so.
That's right. And as Kate prophetically alluded to, we did just lose that signal with the International Space Station. This does happen from time to time, whether we're handing over between the tracking and data relay satellites that we get our communications from, or other people do use them. So it's possible that someone else is using them, or it could be that the antenna is actually blocked. That will happen as the antenna on the outside of the space station that points towards the satellite sometimes gets blocked momentarily by things like the solar arrays and the structure of the space station itself. But we will get that video back shortly. And we've been lucky today. We've had a daylight undocking, so we're getting to see Dragon fly away from the space station in broad daylight. That undocking, again, came at 11:32 p.m. Pacific time, while the station and Dragon were just about 253 statute miles over the Sudan in Africa. But for now, we are just continuing to hang with it. We should get that video communication back with the space station in about 2 minutes or so. And by then, we'll be really close to Dragon moving outside of that approach ellipsoid. That'll be the next big milestone. And getting reports, Dragon a little over 500 meters away now. And it's back with live views from the International Space Station. Dragon still flying away. You can see it lit up here. We should be just a minute or two away from that exit outside of the approach ellipsoid. We'll get that call up to the crew from the Capcom. It's Leslie Ringo there inside of Mission Control Houston. We just passed 700 meters now away from the space station. Again, we're already well outside of that keep out sphere, which is a sphere, imaginary sphere, just 200 meters in radius around the International Space Station. The next one's going to be the exit from that approach ellipsoid. That's the major thing that the station crew is also looking for.